We had a surveillance plane going towards the east, and he nodded and he went quiet for about 30 seconds. And Zakaria said to me, "You're free to go." Then we were dragged into the street and loaded up onto a typical Al-Qaeda vehicle. It was incredibly cold and confusing. I ended up spending the next 5 years, 8 months out in the Sahara, away from civilization, away from buildings, away from the real world. I'd been working in the UK, in London, for a number of years, and I was returning back to my home country, which was South Africa. And I've always had this dream to ride a motorbike through Africa. And really this seemed the right time for me to live my dream. And I began my trip, which was an adventure of a lifetime, something which I've been looking forward to for years, since I was a child. I had this dream since a child. And it was funny that about a month into my trip, I arrived in Mali, which is a country in West Africa, and I arrived in Timbuktu specifically. And I was traveling with some other tourists. We were a few people on motorbikes, a few people in land cruisers, a whole variety of us. And Timbuktu was just a moment on our trip. We were literally going to stop there for a day and then push on south, not knowing that what was going to actually take place the following day and how our lives were going to completely change. A tourist, we had our travel guides wearing shorts and a t-shirt, being carefree, living life, loving life. I was sitting outside, planning some stuff for the next few weeks on my phone, my telephone, writing up a small blog on the day of the actual kidnapping. And I was sitting with some other tourists outside on the patio of the small auberge. Mid-afternoon, Friday, just around Salat Jama'ah, some guys came into our auberge, our small bed and breakfast, with AK-47s. It happened very quickly. One of our guys was killed. 3 of us were kidnapped. A lady was left behind. And we were dragged into the street and loaded up onto a typical Al-Qaeda vehicle, an open-back Land Cruiser. Their Amalia, their operation was just so slick. It just worked so smoothly. And there weren't a lot of them. I think there were maybe 4 of them. Maybe 4 terrorists, four Al-Qaeda soldiers. We were put on the back of the vehicle one by one, three tourists put on the back of the vehicle, all handcuffed. The streets were empty. There was no security around, obviously during the Friday prayer time. And this vehicle drove. We sped out of Timbuktu, obviously, worried about the police or about the gendarmerie or the military, maybe finding us or catching us. And we ended up driving the full night, the whole night, lying in the back of the vehicle, right through the night. It was autumn. It was November, so going into winter in the Sahara. And it was cold. It was cold. There were 3 of us put on the back of the vehicle, and we had a brown blanket put over us. And they pulled a cargo net down over us. And one of the soldiers, one of the Al-Qaeda soldiers, sat on the back of the vehicle as we sped out of town. But we drove right through the night. It was a long 15-hour drive, bouncing around in the back of the vehicle. It was incredibly cold and confusing. I ended up spending the next 5 years, 8 months out in the Sahara, away from civilization, away from buildings, away from the real world. I was kidnapped with 2 other guys. The one guy was rescued, separated from us and rescued within 2 years, and the other guy went home a month before me. And then Al-Qaeda just stockpiled us, and we basically got stuck behind a sand dune about 500 kilometers into the desert in the middle of nowhere, behind a sand dune. Our guys, Al-Qaeda would change groups every 2 months, and off the back of that, we would get replenished food supplies and things like that every 2 months. So we were able to survive in the middle of nowhere because we had food, we had wells, deep wells in the Sahara, so we had water. Some of our guys, their families were in the areas where we were being held. So because of that, they had their tents there, and they had grass huts, and they had sheep and goats and camels. So there again, we could get meat. There would be a family, a very simple family, but they would provide us with goat meat or sheep meat. In the early days, we did proof of life videos. It started out every 3 months. Then it went to every 6 months. And then there were times in the desert where it was about a year and a half between proof of life videos. That was during the time that the French military were in Mali. And at that stage, that Al-Qaeda was not able to make more proof of life videos. And even if we made more, they weren't able to send them because we couldn't get close enough to mobile phone reception. We couldn't get close enough to small villages where there were like, on mobile phone towers. So in the beginning, I mean, we made proof of lives, but we never knew if they went anywhere. We never knew if they were received. We weren't sure what the demands were on our life. We weren't sure who was the most important between the three prisoners. We weren't sure if we were being negotiated one by one, or if we were a group package deal. There were so many concerns. They had mobile phones, but the phones would not work when we were far from mobile phone towers. They also had satellite phones. We also had long range shortwave radios, which we used a lot in the beginning. But as time went by, they didn't work so well across the hot desert sands. They wouldn't be so clear. So then the guys went across to satellite phones. But that was a problem because you turn on your satellite phone and all of a sudden the French know where you are. There was a lot of casualties because of that. So then they basically stopped using satellite phones and then they went back to communication. But, there were times we thought we could try and maybe get a satellite phone and try and phone our family. But the risk of us doing that, if we were caught, would have been absolutely crazy. So we never did anything. So really communication with our family, which was the question you asked, was it was very limited. So the beginning was the uncertainty as to what did they want with me and why was I here and would I ever go home and would I survive or would I be executed? I mean, and that lasted for probably 2 years, that uncertainty. The whole execution stress lasted for a long time in the beginning. But then there was also the other things which were stressful. I mean, not talking to your family, not knowing about the inconvenience, not knowing if your family are okay, not knowing if your family know that I'm still alive and I'm okay. The fact that I was going home to help my father with his business, but because my father was now a Shabani, he was now an older guy, and he wanted to retire, and I was coming home as his son to come climb into his business. But now being kidnapped, obviously, that wasn't going to work, So not knowing if I would ever be able to get home to help my father, and knowing that my father and my family might sell everything that they own to try and meet some form of negotiation to try and cover costs. That terrified me, thinking that my family have worked so hard their whole life and they've not earned enough to be able to pay the ransom. I mean, the ransoms are crazy numbers. They don't even have cash to pay the ransom, but they may pay whatever they can pay, which will leave them destitute, will leave them absolutely poor. The other concern was that my wife, she wanted children. And I was 36, and we were going home to South Africa to start a family and have children, and knowing that, I mean, that I had to carry the guilt for the fact that now I could not go home and help provide children for her. The kidnapping wasn't just about me, it was about me and my family, me and my friends, me and my wife. It wasn't just impacting me, it was impacting such a larger audience. And that was a lot of the more difficult times to try and actually process mentally. I mean, I've realized that physical inconvenience, physical pain is something which is short term, but mental pain is something that is much more difficult to deal with. I thought I wouldn't survive the day. I thought, before the sun goes down, I could be executed. But, I got through those tough times and pushed on, and it was amazing how one grows in tough times and how I came out the end of this thing being so much more complete and so much more human and so much more understanding the blessings in life and being able to live life in the moment rather than always looking towards the future. There were young boys in the Sahara. I mean, the youngest was an 8-year-old, but ordinarily they were probably 15 up to 20 years old. Those were the youngsters. But let's say the 15-year-old, he went from being a guy with no face hair, a short guy, still growing, still going through adolescence, skinny guy, skinny arms, skinny legs. 5 years later now, at 20 years old, 21, 22 years old, he was a man. He was now a big guy with big muscles, with a big beard and a lot of presence. And these guys were now heading up Al-Qaeda's attack groups. So full-blown, from innocent young children, they became full-blown, war veterans in a way. They were killing people and executing people. Nobody told me I was going home. It was just a lot of Al-Qaeda process going on, me changing cars, me moving places, moving camps, being here, being there, moving. And eventually I was standing under a tree with an Al-Qaeda soldier. So Zakaria was his name. And we had a surveillance plane through the tree above us. And we sat there listening. And Zakaria said to me, can you hear the airplane? I'm like, yes. He said, well, where is it? And we sat there looking for the airplane. And I was like, Zakaria, there it is, Hunaka, there it is. And he said to me, and he looked at it and he nodded. And then he said to me, where's this thing going? It's doing circles, obviously. But it was doing circles and moving towards the east. And I sat there saying, well, Zakaria, it's going towards the east. And he nodded and he looked and he nodded and he went quiet for about 30 seconds. And then he looked down at me and nudged me. And he said to me, you're free to go. It was as simple as that. I mean, there was no build-up. It was the most peculiar situation. In fact, I felt quite confused, because it wasn't that I saw the head of Al-Qaeda. It wasn't that I saw a bag of money. It wasn't that a car arrived. It was that this guy just literally said to me, "You're free to go." But it was an amazing day, but it took me months to process. Certainly did not process it up front. In fact, the whole next day was rather terrifying, changing cars, etc., fearing that maybe this could be the last day of my life, because it was such a strange process that was going on after this, dangerous process. But eventually, I was then eventually, through a lot of things, taken back to the Malian government. And then there was a private jet parked on the runway, and then I flew back to South Africa. I can't say there was a defining moment where I went, wow, I'm free. It was a slow process to slowly, things became less confusing slowly. Because when I got back to South Africa, I was confused because the world had changed so much. Drones, WhatsApp, Instagram, TikTok, all of these things had been created, when I was in the desert, and craft coffee. I had no idea what craft coffee was. Everybody's drinking coffee these days. I had no idea. And I came back and there were things that changed so much. It took me months before I could actually feel as though I was human and could actually add value and understand a situation and actually add value to a conversation. We got to just do our best, be the best versions of ourselves, make the biggest impact on people around us, positive impacts, do good deeds, because there's so much more waiting for us. And that's what really counts.